Good afternoon. Thank you for joining our webinar today. Using your logic model as a tool to guide program refinement and evaluation. We're going to give about 2 minutes as others are joining the platform. Stand by. We're 2 minutes away from the beginning. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Before we begin, we would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple applications widgets you can use. You can expand each widget by clicking on the maximize icon at the top right of the widget or by dragging the bottom right corner of the widget panel. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available approximately 1 day after the webcast using the same link to join today's event. A copy of today's slide deck and a handout on our logic models are available on the resource list widget, indicated by the green file icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during this session, you can click on the purple Q&A budget button at the bottom and submit your question. You can submit questions anytime during the webcast. If you have technical difficulties, you can click on the yellow help widget as a question mark icon that covers common technical issues. Please note, most technical issues can be resolved by pressing F5 or Command R via Macs. We will be using the group chat feature as well during this event. The group chat will be visible to everyone that's in the audience, everyone's comments. During the presentations, we will pause for something called think time, and in some cases, you will be asked to respond to your poll. In other cases, you will be asked to respond via the group chat. Your responses are not associated with your name or your organization, rather, your ID used to register. Now I'd like to introduce Heather Zavari. Heather, you have the floor. Heather, I think you might be muted.
I am muted. Thank you. Sorry about that all. Hi, all. Thank you, Brian, and thank you all for joining today's webinar. Today's webinar, as we've mentioned, is addressing logic models. I'm Heather Zavari, and I am the Deputy Project Director for the Sexual Risk Avoidance Education National Evaluation. This is our second in a series of planned webinars that are occurring throughout the remainder of this calendar year and are really intended to help introduce SRAE grantees to a range of data capacity and evaluation topics. These webinars are being planned as part of the SRAE National Evaluation. As Brian mentioned, the recording from today's webinar will be available in a few days for viewing, and we will also be uploading the slides from today's webinar to the SRAE website soon, and the link for the SRAE website will be included in the slides as we go through today's presentation. As I mentioned, the work is occurring as part of our contract that Mathematica and its subcontractor, Public Strategies, holds for this national evaluation. The content we'll cover during today's webinar does not necessarily reflect HHS policy or requirements. So on today's webinar, we're going to revisit a topic that was discussed at the January 2019 orientation meeting that several grantees attended, and that is the topic of logic models. The presenter who did the session for us at the orientation meeting back in January is able to join us again today, and we are really happy for her to be with us. So now I'd like to introduce Kay Bradley, who's a senior researcher at Mathematica, to present today's webinar. Take it away, Kay.
Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody. I want to let you, first of all, I know there have been some comments about volume and voices going in and out. Could somebody please indicate in the group chat if you're okay with my audio? Now you're silent, of course, but come on. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay, somebody gave me an okay. Oh, I need to be louder. Okay, let me see what I can do. All right, so let's see if that's a little bit better. All right, so today this is going to be an interactive webinar. I want to interact with you all to the extent that we can in a virtual webinar. We're going to pause a couple of times during the webinar to give you guys some thinking time to reflect on your own logic model. So I really hope you all can lay your hands on the logic models quickly, and I suggest you start moving around to do that right now. And we are going to both share thoughts either in response to a poll or also through the group chat. As Brian indicated, I will ask you some questions and we will ask you to answer in there. And the other thing is if you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I'm sort of going to watch the Q&A box when we're not doing thinking time, and I'll be watching the group chat when we're doing thinking time. So if you have a question, please make sure you put it in the Q&A box, which, as Brian said, you can access through, I believe, the purple widget. And if you're responding during thinking time, feel free to use the group chat. All right. So today we're going to be talking about logic models. And I want you to remember that everything we're talking about today is optional. You are not going to need to submit a new logic model to your project officer. So those of you who are sitting there going, oh, great, what do I have to give my project officer? The answer at this point is nothing. But I hope at the end of the webinar today, you'll see why I love logic models and how it can be really useful to you all in a lot of ways. And I really do encourage you to revisit them. So we have three main topics to talk about today. The first one is how a logic model can be helpful. I want to convince you all that it is more than just something you have to put in a grant application. We're also going to talk about matching your logic model to your audience and your purpose. And finally, we're going to just do a quick reminder about the various parts of a logic model. So the other thing to remember is that the SRAE team will schedule office hours in the near future to answer your questions about logic models. And I'll remind you of the email to send a request for individual assistance at the end of the presentation. All right. So for me, a logic model, as I said, is way more than just a grant requirement. It can help me talk with others about a particular program. I can use it to build consensus on what's important or trying to identify what might be going wrong if my program doesn't seem to be working. It can also help me understand what to measure, whether I'm trying to do an evaluation or I'm just doing continuous quality improvement. It can also be used to make sure that all staff are on the same page. And when I say all staff, I mean not just all the program staff or all the evaluation staff, but also making sure that all of the program staff and the evaluation staff, if you have evaluation staff, are on the same page. I do want to check, somebody has chatted that they lost my audio. Are they a solo or did everybody lose me?
Okay, you're fine. Remember, everybody's remote, so they would need to refresh their screen, and then audio would come back. It could be an internet issue.
Okay. All right. So if you're having trouble seeing slides or you're having trouble with audio, remember your best friend today is the refresh button. So make sure that you refresh as needed. All right. I'm going to go back to what we were talking about. Logic models can help you facilitate collaboration within your own organization or across organizations. And it can also support discussions about continuous quality improvement, evaluation, and sustainability. All right. So if your organization is working to become outcome focused, which is a phrase that I have heard around, a logic model can help you with that because it can support the clear understanding about who you serve, what you provide, and the outcomes you expect to achieve. A logic model is simply that in a graphic form. It should represent the thinking of how your program is going to achieve its goal or vision, and that's how it can be useful for you guys to use it with stakeholders. It can also be a touchstone for discussions, as I talked about. You can use a logic model to help you with continuous quality improvement, to help you think about what needs to be monitored. So you can look and see how, if you're not getting an outcome that you want, you can actually backtrack in your logic model, or you should be able to backtrack in your logic model and see what things you may want to be monitoring as a part of your continuous quality improvement. And of course, you can use it to help you design an evaluation. It can help you identify research questions that may be of interest to you. It can help you think about what to measure and when to measure. And it can also help you think about contextual factors that you need to monitor as a part of your evaluation. So when I think about a logic model, I think of it as having 7 parts. Now, we could debate how many parts there are in a logic model because different people have a different number of parts they're used to including, and different people use different labels. But today, we've got 7, okay? 7. And at this point, I just want to run over these quickly because we will talk about them in more detail later on. So there's the goal. This is kind of why are you doing this program? What are you trying to change? There are assumptions, which are the beliefs that you have about how the program will work and also about the resources that are around to support the program. You've got to think about your inputs. So what is it that you have to invest in order to deliver this program? And this is not just money, it's also staff and partners and things like that. Who are you trying to serve? That's your target population. The activities, of course, are what you're doing and who you're reaching as a part of your program. Outputs are what's immediately produced, okay? And then finally, their outcomes. Today, we're going to talk about short-term or immediate outcomes, which happen immediately at the end of the program. We're also going to talk about intermediate outcomes that happen 6 to 12 months after the end of the program. And then long-term outcomes happen a year or more after the end of the program. The timing of outcomes is one of the things that will vary based on the program that you're talking about and the grant that you're responding to. The other thing to know is that you can have outcomes in your logic model that are not going to be able to be collected during your grant period. That's fine. Your logic model could include outcomes that you can't collect, and that is more than reasonable to do that. So do remember that because you want your logic model really to show everything that you want. All right, I've got a question. So somebody's telling me, hey, I've done inputs, outputs, and outcomes on logic model. So they have 3 of my 7 parts. And the question is, that was very cluttered. Why do you want to add more? So I think there is a balance between cluttering up a page, right? Your logic model should be about a page. Don't try to make it too big because then no one can read it. But I do think that some of these other pieces, like thinking about the activities and thinking about the assumptions, is really important to help you think about your logic model. But exactly how much detail you give in each one of those parts may be determined in part by what you're trying to achieve with your logic model. All right. So I used to teach high school science. And those of you who may remember your high school science days, you may remember learning about if-then, right? The if-then statements for research. So the nice thing about an if-then statement, it is a clear way to connect things in a logical fashion. And you can use the if-then statements to link the parts of your logic model. A logic model should be much more than just those boxes that we so frequently see on a piece of paper with arrows. It really should show you the logic about how everything is put together. Now, before some of you start to tell me, my program isn't linear, they're different pathways. My logic model can't be linear. I understand that that is always true, but nonetheless, the logic model can help outline those different pathways and outline where you might be headed in one direction and you might turn around and go back. So logic models tend to be presented in a linear fashion, but we understand that programs do not always function in a linear fashion. So if you combine, so this is the slide, and I'm going to read it to you because this is really important to me. So if we combine these inputs with these assumptions, then we do these activities, right? You have to have your inputs to do your activities. If we do these activities, then we have these outputs. If we have these outputs, then we expect to achieve these outcomes, both short-term, intermediate, and long-term. And if we achieve these outcomes, then we have achieved our goal for this target population. So that's how those 7 pieces fit together. All right, I've gotten a comment that somebody else is buying into my if-then structure. So that's really exciting to me because I do hope you all will think about that when you look at your logic models. All right, so now we're coming up to the first time that we're going to pause and do some thinking time. Our first, like I said, there are going to be 2 different types of activities we do here. One is a poll, and in that case, I'm going to push a poll question to you. You're going to have a set responses. You have to choose one of them, and we'll talk about the results. And then the other one is where you're going to use your group chat. So this first one is a poll, and what I want to know is, has your team looked at your logic model recently? So take a moment, be honest, answer yes or no. Yes, my team has looked at my logic model recently, and not just in preparation for this webinar, by the way. Or no, we actually haven't looked at it recently. So let's work on selecting your answers. All right, this is a pretty simple question. It shouldn't take too long to think about. So I'm going to go to the results. So 52.8% of you who have responded indicated that you have looked at your logic model. That's wonderful. 47.2% of those of you who have responded are honest about the fact you haven't looked at it recently. That's fine. I'm really hoping that you will bring your logic model to the surface. So we've gotten a comment about whether or not activities are outputs. I'm actually not going to respond to that comment right now because much later in the presentation we'll talk in a little bit more detail about the differences between activities and outputs. The other thing I want to share with you all is there is a handout in the resources section along with a copy of the slides, and that handout has some information there as well. All right, so now we're on to our first chat question. So this is where you need to respond in the group chat box. And I want you to give me just a few words, don't write a dissertation for me, about how your team uses your logic model. And if you don't use your logic model, that's fine too. You can tell me you don't use your logic model. But let's give me an idea of how your team uses your logic model, please. All right, somebody has been very kind and shared that they don't actually have a logic model. That's fine, that does happen. I hope that at the end of this webinar you will decide to go home and make a logic model. All right, somebody else is using their logic model to justify the program. Now, they haven't clarified who they're justifying to because you could justify to stakeholders or to start partners, okay? People are using it to assess progress, to track progress, to keep on track to make sure you're doing what you want to do. Those of you who are responding in the Q&A box about how you use your logic model, I'm going to encourage you to go find the group chat feature, which is the little blue double button, and use that so that I can keep everything in one place. Guiding conversation about how the program is going, that's great. Again, here's somebody else who doesn't really use it, using it to help link staff members and responsibilities. All right. There's a lot going on here. So there's a lot of variation between you all and how you use your logic model, which is terrific. And hopefully that means that some of you will be like, oh, I've seen this before. Oh, I love this one. We keep it in the front of our binders. That's a great one. Hopefully that means it gets looked at as well, not just skimmed over. All right. You all can stop sharing if you want to. I'm going to move on. We have another poll question. I want you guys to think about whether or not your logic model includes all of the parts that I mentioned. Now, I'm guessing that there's some, like the goal and the target population, that may not be there, but let's go look and see. You have three answers here, three choices here. You can say yes, yes, but not by those names, and no. All right, so take a moment and answer the poll, and while you do that, somebody has indicated that they've got SMART goals. We'll talk about SMART outcomes later. And people use logic models to help keep them focused. Okay, that's great. And somebody's offering up that their program doesn't even start until the logic model's been reviewed by the team, which is a great thing because that means everybody's on the same page. All right, again, I'm not expecting this poll to have needed a lot of time or thought, but maybe I'm wrong, so let's go see how we're doing with results. All right, so if we combine yes, people have all the parts, and then yes, but not by those names, which is a fair one. Like I said, lots of people use different names. Clear majority of you guys have got all of the parts, which is great. And some of you are missing parts, which is fine too. All right. So I have another poll question there. And this is because I love the if-then structure. So I want to know if the if-then structure, which we just talked about, will help you look at your logic model differently. Now, if you were in the January 2019 orientation meeting, you might have to say no to this one because hopefully you fell in love with the if-then structure then. But here comes the poll. Again, just be honest, say yes or no. All right, I'm going to go see what the answer looks like. So the good news is all of you love the if-then structure like I do. I'm so happy to hear that. It was something that somebody taught me after I've been working with logic models for a while, and I have to tell you, it's made all the difference in the world when I talk about logic models with people or when I review my own logic models or build logic models. So I'm really glad y'all like it. All right. So in the group chat box, again, I want you to use the group chat box, not the Q&A box. Give me a couple words about what, if any, gaps your logic model may have because you've now looked at it through this if-then lens, and how might you address those gaps. And if you were lucky enough to attend the orientation or to have a colleague who attended the orientation, you all may have already gone through your logic model with an if-then lens and fixed some of the gaps, so share what those gaps were and what you did to fix them. So I'll give you a little bit longer to answer this because it's going to, you got to use the group chat. You got to put a couple of words there. And if you haven't done that, think about what you might find and how you might fix it. All right, so somebody's doing a really good job of previewing what's coming along because they share that they've used logic models to help funders see things, to see what they're funding, right? What activities are they paying for? What's going to happen? But you have to tailor it to fit their particular focus. Somebody's being honest that they actually need to look at their logic model with the if-then structure, which is great. Oh, so somebody's leadership came back and made them do this. Now they know where it came from. And if you use the if-then, it will provide, I think it'll help you get a better flow in your logic model. Okay? All right. Okay, no gaps, but the if-then helps make it more understandable. That's true too. You may not be missing something. It may just help you present it better. Okay? And yes, the if-then structure will help you understand the connections between your outcomes and make sure that they're there, that you've got the right ones there that you're paying attention to. Okay, that's great. Thank you for all those comments. All right, so now what we're going to talk about is logic models for different audiences and purposes. All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit here. You guys have already been sort of previewing this in the group chat a little bit, but a single logic model is just that. It's a single logic model, and it may not be able to do all of the things that you want it to do or that you need it to do. It may not resonate with all of the different audiences that you need to talk to about your program, right? If I am a parent, I'm going to want to see a logic model that's emphasizing what my youth is going to get from your program. If I am a funder, I want to see how you're using my money. So those might be two slightly different logic models. You may have different, kind of give more paper space, if you will, to different things. So I'm going to share a couple of different presentations of logic models that I took off the web in a minute. Because I want to show that sometimes the linear boxes on a page is not quite what you want, and sometimes you need to change this a little bit. I want to be clear that for me, this is sort of the part where we're talking about tailoring your logic model, just like you have to tailor your speech for the elevator speech, right? You have to think about who you're stuck in the elevator with and to give them that 5-minute conversation about your program. That may be a reason to have different logic models. All right, so as I have previewed, I don't believe that one logic model achieves everything. I think that you could, for example, have a if you are an organization, you may have a logic model that's capturing the full set of programming that you do, right? That may be all your activities, is the different programs that you offer. But then you may have more specific logic models for each one of those specific programs that your organization offers. The other thing is that sometimes you need to have an overview of a program for people like funders, right, who want to see the full picture. And then you may want to have a logic model with a specific focus for a particular group. So one of the things that comes to mind for me is when you're talking about the actual staff who are providing the program, they may need a lot more detail about the inputs and the activities and the outputs. They may need less detail about the outcomes. So you may have a logic model that looks a little bit different for them, okay? And then, so I've talked about that. All right, so here we go. So here is an example of a fairly standard presentation of a logic model. It is boxes on a page, and it's got arrows to help you understand how things flow. Just like in most logic models, you're going to move from the left to the right. They use slightly different language than I'm using in my presentation. They've got a box about the situation and the priorities, but then they've got inputs and outputs and outcomes, and they've got assumptions and external factors. And you can see that their assumptions are going back and forth, and so are their external factors. All right, so I love it. Somebody has already come in and said, wait, how do I keep more than one logic model current? And I think the way to do that is really to think about your logic models as a package, right? And if you're going to change something in one, you need to go see if you have to change it in the others. That's a great question because it's a lot of work sometimes. That is a great question. All right. Here is another presentation. Again, this one's pretty straightforward, but in this case, we're reading from the bottom up, okay? So they're showing inputs, they're showing activities, outputs, and then they have short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes, and they have impact. They don't have those intermediate outcomes, and their impact is sort of proving, the goal that they're trying to achieve. So that's another example, and again, it may be very easy. It may be a good presentation for some people. All right. The last one I want to show you is a pretty picture. And I really like this, but it's very much a bird in the sky kind of picture. I will be honest, If I was an evaluator and you said, here's my logic model, Kay, I'd be like, can we make this a little bit less pretty? And that's just because as an evaluator, I want a logic model that's extremely functional. Now, if you look at this closely enough, and you might have trouble seeing it, but trust me here, they have activities. That's on the left flower with the sun over it. They have reach, so they're talking about who it is they're serving. That's above the little black box. They have outputs, and they have outcomes. Those are in the house. And then down at the bottom, they've got their inputs. So they have decided to use this kind of a presentation. This might be really helpful if you're trying to get partner organizations, for example, to participate with you. This is a pretty picture about what your program is. It might be useful for some funders or for other stakeholder conversations. All right. So now we're going to do a little bit more thinking time here. I want to know, this is just a yes/no question, so it's not going to take you long to answer it. Can you think of other presentations of your logic model that could be helpful to your team? So yes or no. Oh, and I did give you not right now, but with time. So in case you're sitting there scratching your head and thinking, I think I can probably come up with this. So let's just take a moment and answer the poll question in your window, please. All right, hopefully you have answered. I have rehydrated, so I will be ready to speak quickly again. So here we go, let's look at the results. So not surprisingly, some of you have thought about different presentations, and that's great. Some of you are like, nope, never thought about it. I will confess, there was a time in my life I'd be like, what logic model? Only for the application. I'm done. Don't need to touch it again. I encourage you to think about that. And then the majority of you are saying, I can get there, but I need a little bit more time. That is perfectly fine. My goal today is to try to start getting those juices flowing and trying to get you all to begin to understand that having conversations with people about your logic models and having more than one might actually be really useful to your program. All right, so this is a chat question again. It may be a chat question that some of you are ready to answer and some of you are not, but hopefully some of you will answer. So if you are thinking about a different logic model, what is the audience or the focus that you think you might need to have a different logic model for? So for example, is it the funder? Is it the parent? Is it the schools that you need to talk your way into in order to deliver your program? Who is it? That's the audience. And or what is the focus? Why do you need a different logic model? Do you need a logic model that's more useful for your program staff, the people delivering the program? If you're not willing to think about extra logic models, just tell me why. I'm really interested in understanding sort of what people are thinking about with respect to that. All right, so remember, group chat box, share with me your thoughts. Explaining the project. Oh, pitching to community partners and getting backing from government representatives. So those are kind of stakeholders. They're the funders, program staff, schools, right? So, operations staff and evaluation staff might need a different presentation. I'll tell you right now, that is very, very true. And that's a good reason to have two different logic models. Parents, partners, yep, schools, right? All of your community partners, trying to help them really understand what it is your program is going to do and what is it going to look like. A logic model can be really helpful for youth as well because they can see exactly what those activities are and how you're going to help them, what kind of outcomes you're going to change, okay? Board of directors, the community, right? The community is very interested in what's going on, so those are good places. Some people are saying, hey, I've got a really good logic model. I just need to share it more broadly than I've thought about it. So that's good. You can also think about that as well. A logic model might be able to help you get some better engagement from youth, thinking about how to do that. Action planning, yep. So thinking about action planning, and what is it that's going to be next on the radar? Those are all great answers. All right, so now I'm going to ask you, and some of you have already gotten this, I want you to answer in the group chat, what changes do you think you could make to your logic model? Now, for those of you who already have a list of 10 changes scribbled out, I appreciate that, but just give me 2. Don't give me more than 2 changes. So share with me some of the changes that you might make. Okay, so somebody's got a great one in here, which is a supplemental logic model, because that's really what I'm talking about here, that ends with certified staff. So if you've got a program and one of your inputs is certified staff, sometimes it's helpful to have a logic model that talks about how you're going to get those certified staff. That can help people understand exactly how long it's going to take to get a program up and running and why you need the level of resource support that you need. Okay, bang for the buck, right? Having a logic model that captures the bang for the buck for sustainability, that's a great one. And part of what you want to do here, as this person suggests, is really revisit both the inputs and the outcomes, because you want to have all the inputs and you want to have all the outcomes. Okay, making it more attractive. Storytelling features, okay, those may be appropriate depending on your audience. Remember, know who your audience is that you're looking for, okay? Adding if-then statements, so it may be helpful. You don't actually have to put the if-then in the logic model. You can just make sure that it's kind of inherent in there if you want to. But for some people, you might want to put the if-then in there. That might actually help them, and I've seen a logic model that way. All right, that's great. Those are some really great ideas you've had. All right, so now I want to talk about skimming the surface of the elements. So we are going to dive in a little bit more to those 7 elements of a logic model. I know that many of you know things about logic models already, so I am not trying to start from ground zero, but I do want to just re-emphasize some things. And I'm going to remind you all that the handout in the resources widget on your slide, which is green, includes a handout that has a logic model shell in it, and then information from these slides to support your team in talking about your logic models. Because I really think the work on a logic model needs to be done as a team. You need to sort of think about what you're trying to do. All right, so before I dive into this particular slide, let me tell you what the structure of the next couple of slides are. So you're going to see that there is an element of a logic model. So this is the slide about goals. And we're going to have some information about what the goal is. So that's in the dark blue, sorry. And then we have a list of questions to consider. And these are questions that we think can help your team have a conversation about the goal and what should be on your logic model. So I'm not necessarily going to go through these questions, but they're there nonetheless so that you can see those, okay? So you should have a goal. You need to have articulated what it is you're trying to accomplish with your program. It should include objectives. It gives the rationale for the program described in the model. It's important that you know why you're trying to provide this program to the particular individuals that you want to provide it to in the particular community that you're working in. All of that's kind of in the goal, okay? So questions to consider, you can see here, what's the problem or the issue? Why is it a problem? So those are the kinds of things that you should think about to help you articulate your goal. All right. And by the way, we are going to go sort of from the beginning to the end. So we're going to start with inputs and end with outcomes. I will be honest, not everybody develops their logic model in a linear fashion. Not everybody goes from left to right. I am somebody who tends to go from right to left because I think about the outcomes and then I worry about what it is I need to achieve those outcomes. But however you want to do it, it's fine. But I'm going to go from how people would usually present it from left to right. So, inputs. What is it that has to be invested to accomplish the activities and achieve the outputs and the outcomes? I will be honest, I think sometimes the inputs get the shortest shrift in a logic model because you all forget about all of the in-kind inputs that you have that you're putting in there. So I really encourage you to think about inputs, particularly if this is a logic model that you're taking to stakeholders and to funders. You want them to see how much effort goes into providing this program. The other thing is that sometimes inputs, in my view, hide things, right? So if one of my inputs is certified staff, as we referenced before, that could really be hiding a whole lot about what it takes to get certified staff. And so in that case, that might be one of those places where you have that supplemental logic model where the outcome is certified staff, and then that outcome connects to the input in your next logic model. And I'll be honest, I have worked with a grantee, and they had a program to work with youth, but the first thing they had to do was change how the staff were working with the youth, and so they had to get the staff ready for this intervention. And the first logic model I saw from them had both the logic model for the staff part and also the logic model for the youth part, if you will. And as you can imagine, it was overwhelming. Now, they tried to color code it and all this other stuff, but it was way too much on one page, and it really kind of made you not be able to focus on either what it took to get the staff or what the youth were going to get. So that, again, is a situation where it took a lot of talking, let me tell you, but I finally got them to have two different logic models, one about developing the certified staff and one about the youth. All right. Next up are assumptions. All of us hold beliefs about the program, the people, and how things will work. Putting on just my eval TA liaison hat for a moment, I will tell you that assumptions are frequently overlooked and not articulated. And unfortunately, that means sometimes you haven't tested your assumption to make sure it's true, and it can lead to a big problem if you've got an evaluation going on. It can also lead to a big problem even if you don't have an evaluation going on. But it's always good to look at your assumptions. And again, here's some questions about thinking about your assumptions. So why do you think it's going to work this way? Right? And is there evidence that supports those assumptions that you have? So let me share with you some assumptions that I have either made myself or witnessed other people making that caused a little bit of trouble here. And we've got a bunch here, but I'm going to highlight a few. So the first one, youth are engaged with partner agencies and can easily be referred to this program. I cannot tell you how many times I've worked with grantees who needed to work with partners in their community to reach the youth that they were trying to reach. And they're like, oh, it'll be fine. They're certainly going to have enough youth. And then we start going and they're trying to build the sample for the evaluation, because remember, I tend to do eval TA, right? So I'm involved if they've got an evaluation going on. And we start having trouble building that sample. And we start going, well, wait a minute. I thought these programs served the types of youth that you wanted in your program and your evaluation. And then it turns out, oh no, they actually serve younger or older or whatever. So that's a key one. The third one I want to bring your attention to here as well. Frequently you've got a program that's using a chosen curriculum, and then you also need to cover something else, and you go, oh, that's not a problem. We'll just tack something on here. But you need to make sure that the curriculum is right for the youth that you're trying to serve, and that what you're tacking on actually can be tacked on or added in a meaningful way. So sometimes the developer of the main program is going to be like, nope, you cannot do not think about adding anything else to my program. My program is what my program is, right? So then you have a problem because you chose a curriculum and you can't actually add the piece that's missing. The other thing is if they'll let you add it, you need to think about sort of where does it fit and how will it affect the flow of the curriculum. So is there repetition? Do you need to worry about that? Okay. The fourth one, this is a big one. Youth have transportation to attend after school and weekend sessions. Again, putting on my eval TA hat, I can tell you I've worked with a number of grantees who were providing programming either after school or had some weekend component to it, and they didn't think about transportation. They thought that the youth would have no problem getting to them, and that turned out to be a problem. So they got the youth enrolled, so from an evaluation perspective, they got the sample, but then they started running into problems because the youth weren't actually getting the program that they were supposed to be getting at the dose they were supposed to be getting. And so that began to make people be worried that they weren't going to see the outcomes that they wanted because the youth weren't actually getting what they needed. So that's a big assumption to consider. And the last one is frequently assumed but rarely spoken from my experience, but it's really important when you're thinking about your goal or your outcomes, particularly your long-term outcomes. And that is that the program that you're developing the logic model for is a starting point, and that youth will continue to participate in curriculum and activities that reinforce the messages of that program as they grow older and progress through school. So if you've got a program for elementary kids and you've got a long-term outcome that's not going to happen until they're 25, you've got an assumption that there's going to be some sort of continuing work with those youth as they grow older in order to keep that messaging there. All right, activities. Some people break and we saw this in the simple view of the logic model, break their activities up into what they do and who they reach. But these are the actions that your program takes to create the outputs. So this is about thinking about how are you using the inputs to get the outputs that you have. And in some ways, if you're thinking about using a logic model to help parents or youth or community leaders understand what the youth are going to do within the program and what they're going to experience, this is where a lot of that information is probably hidden, if you will. So it's a good thing to think about there. I do have a question on here about are all critical activities represented? And I want to be very, very clear that here, when I talk about critical activities during today's webinar, I mean the activities that your program considers critical to your logic model and to your program. I am not saying that there is a set of critical activities somewhere that is a deep, dark secret that I am keeping from you. Your logic model should include those activities that you believe are critical to your program. All right. So outputs are direct products or deliverables that result from the activities, and they're going to lead to outcomes. So in this case, you want to think about, one of my activities is to do experiential learning trips through the local park. What's my output? It's going to be the number of kids who participate in the trips or something like that, right? That's going to be the output of that activity. So you need to think about that. And then the output should actually be connected to your outcomes as well. Remember all that if-then that we learned about earlier. All right, so your outcomes are what you believe are going to change. And these can be behavior, norms, decision-making practices, knowledge, attitudes, wide range of things. As I said, sometimes people gobble all of their outcomes up just into one big box, and you can't tell kind of which ones come first, but that's fine. I personally don't like that setup because, remember, I tend to be an evaluator, so I like to see the logic, and I need to see kind of timing of when I might measure things. So sometimes people only have 2 categories of outcomes. It just depends, and that's fine. But today, think about immediate, or short-term, which are immediately after the program ends. Intermediate, which are 6 to 12 months after the program ends. And then long-term, which are a year or more after the program ends. And remember, your long-term can be really, really long-term. They don't have to fall within your grant period. All right. Now, logic models are about logic, and we've talked about the if-then statement. So I'm going to introduce, hopefully I'm only going to remind you of something, not introduce it to you, and that is the outcome chain. So outcome chains help you see the logic in the outcome portion of the logic model. And your immediate outcomes should lead to your intermediate outcomes, which then should be connected to your long-term outcomes. Outcomes, particularly when I'm thinking about an outcome chain, are one of those places where I usually start at the right and move backwards. So I usually start with my long-term outcomes and then go to my intermediate outcomes and then go to my immediate outcomes. And then I stop and I go, are those really feasible? And can I tie those immediate outcomes to my outputs? And if not, I have a big problem. And maybe the program that I thought I was developing is not really going to achieve what I had hoped. Okay? It's really important to make sure the logic is there. So some of the work that I do is around youth and youth homelessness. And a long-term outcome that you frequently see in that work, of course, is stable housing. That's fine. That is a perfect long-term outcome. But it's not a good long-term outcome if I don't have intermediate and immediate outcomes that somehow or another are related to housing or to the ability of a youth to secure housing. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. The other thing to remember is that your outcomes should be SMART. And hopefully that resonates with all of you. You've heard about SMART goals. Here we're talking about SMART outcomes. So outcomes should be specific about who or what is expected to change. They should be measurable. You should be able to see, hear, count, or smell them. All right. They should be attainable, so they should be reasonable. There should be a chance. You should have a reason to believe that you can achieve that outcome. They should be results-oriented, which means that the outcomes themselves have meaning and value. And they should be timed, so you should know that they can happen within a set time frame. All right. Now, I'm going to show you an example of an outcome chain, but I want to be very, very clear before I show you the slide that I did not set SMART outcomes. So this slide could be improved. Now, I don't want you guys to focus on how this slide could be improved, and I don't want you to focus on the outcomes beyond making sure that you can see the logic in the outcome chain, which is part of the reason why I didn't make it SMART, because I was afraid then you guys would start fussing with me about whether or not my SMART outcomes were actually attainable. So here we go. So you can see here that I have an output, and in this case, my output is that youth complete all sessions, okay? And then I have some short-term outcomes or immediate outcomes, and this is about increasing knowledge and increasing intent to abstain, okay? So this is about increasing some knowledge skills, some intent. Then we have some intermediate outcomes, which are continued recognition that teen sex is not prevalent or expected, and improved relationship behaviors. And you can imagine that those would arise from the knowledge and the intent short-term outcomes that we have. And then finally, we have a long-term outcome of avoiding sexual activity and related risk behaviors. And again, those come naturally from those intermediate outcomes. All right. Okay, so I have a question about the outcome chain and whether or not every short-term outcome should be connected to an intermediate outcome and every intermediate outcome should be connected to a long-term outcome. Now, I'm sure all of you can guess what my answer would be, and that is yes. I actually think that every outcome in your logic model should be able to be tied to a subsequent outcome. Now, you may have one short-term or immediate outcome that's actually tied to a couple of different intermediate ones, which is fine. That's fine. You can sort of have that blossoming, if you will. But if you can't tie your outcomes together, I think you really need to think about whether or not that's an outcome that's important for that program and an outcome that that program might actually change. And it may be that, you know, the couple that are sort of not connected are actually the really important outcomes to you, and you may want to rethink the other ones, or it may be that those are the ones you want to remove. But yes, I think your outcomes should be connected together. All right. I am tired of talking, and it is time for you all to do some thinking and some sharing. So my first question is a poll question. So again, you're going to get a set of responses you have to choose from. And I want you to share with all of us whether or not you've ever thought of the outcome chains in your logic model. So yes, no, or never thought of these. This is new to me. Never thought of it, which is fine too. I should also say that you might have thought about outcome chains but not called them outcome chains, which is fine too. And in that case, you should give yourself the credit of having thought about outcome chains. All right, I'm going to wait a couple more seconds in case there are a few of you out there fell asleep while I was talking earlier and have just woken up and realized there's a poll to complete. All right, let's go see what the results are. So the good news is that most of you have thought about outcome chains. So that's wonderful. I'm really glad that you guys have thought about them. And that more of you who have not thought about them or who indicated no or never thought are more of you are in the never thought category. So I think that's great too, because that means you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should think about them, right? So I think that's great. And I think talking about the outcome chains can be really helpful for you guys if you're thinking about getting ready to go into an evaluation, or if you're in an evaluation and you're like, why aren't we seeing what we wanted to see? You can sort of look through that outcome chain and back it up. All right. So now I have a chat box question or a group chat question for you. So I want to know, if you look at your logic model using the outcome chain lens, is there something missing? Is there something you need to do? The flip side of that question, of course, is do you have things on there that you don't really need on there? So take a moment, put some words in the group chat, let me know kind of, and your colleagues know whether or not using this outcome chain lens is going to change how you look at your logic model. All right, so the good thing is somebody has already said, they're not as clear as they could be, and we have this short-term outcome that's just kind of hanging out there by itself. That's great to have seen that. Okay. Somebody is indicating that, yes, a lot of times people use arrows to show connections, and particularly between their outcomes. The nice thing, and I'll be honest, I've seen arrows that go from a specific outcome to another outcome, and you have this like web of arrows. And I've also seen big ones that are just kind of saying all our short-term go to intermediate. I like to see the little ones. So some people are beginning to say, hey, wait a minute, we've got some outcomes here that aren't connected. And somebody has suggested clarifying outcome chains so the staff better understand what you're doing. I think that's a great one. It can help the staff understand that, for example, getting a kid to go to class every day is really important because it can lead to high school graduation, okay? So sometimes thinking about specificity is really important, and particularly in this place. And so I do think that this will help you get a little bit more specificity in here, okay? Some people are like, yep, we're here, we're good. So that's good. And somebody is offering up that everything right now in their logic model is connected to their post-survey results. I'm assuming that's an immediate post-survey. And so you're right. The problem there is you don't have those intermediate and long-term ones. And even if you can't measure them, it's worth having them in your logic model so that you know sort of how everything is connected together, and you can see how those are connected together. So somebody asked a question about developing SMART goals and preferred timeframes. And I think what you need to do is think about the timeframe needs to be right for the type of outcome that you're looking at, right? So in today's presentation, I've been talking about immediate or short-term outcomes, which are immediate post. And then I've been talking about intermediate, which are in a 6 to 12-month post-programming window, and then long-term, which are a year or more. So one of the big things to think about is to think about whether or not, what are those windows that you're looking at and that you want to represent. And then that will help you have that time period reference for your SMART goal. And then you need to make sure they're actually in the right place, right? Like it actually needs to be something that you think you will see change in during that time. So going back to my youth homelessness work, if my program is aimed at helping kids, helping youth stay in school and get secondary education, whether it is going to college or going to community college or getting a getting a skill. My immediate goal, my short-term goal, probably should not be stable housing because my program is giving them the skills to get there, and so I may want to kind of have a step process there. Okay. All right, somebody is asking me about how many outcome chains. So I think that how many outcome chains is dependent upon your program, like what is it that your program can actually accomplish, and what is the purpose of your logic model, right? So you need to think about that. There's not a magic number. You may have lots of immediate outcomes and a medium amount of intermediate. It just kind of depends, and you really need to think about sort of what is my program, what do I think it's going to achieve in the time frames that I'm using for my outcomes, and what is it that I need to show somebody that I'm achieving. Okay. All right, let's go to the next one. So the next question, remember, for critical outcomes, these are the outcomes that are most important to you and your program. So think about your logic model and think about whether or not you actually have all of the critical outcomes in your logic model. So simple yes, no. I'll give you a couple more seconds to respond. All right. So most of you say all of your critical outcomes are captured in your logic model, which is great. You may have some outcomes in your logic model that are not critical, it's not that they're not important, it's just that they're not the big ones that you're trying to make sure you move. And that's what I mean by critical outcomes. So your outcomes section of your model, logic model, may very well include some things that are leading up to things. So for example, your critical outcomes may be at the long-term outcome stage, and then what you have to do is make sure that you have those outcome chains that will achieve that. So that's why you may have outcomes in your logic model that you don't necessarily consider critical, but they're in the outcome chain to something that you do consider critical. Okay? And as far as how do you differentiate, it's really up to you and your program, but it may also be up to who's the logic model for, right? If you are seeking money from a foundation that has a particular type of work that they try to fund because they're trying, they have a mission and they want to do work that is connected to their mission, you may choose to highlight the outcomes that you have that are connected to their mission, and you may choose to remove from that logic model, for example, the outcomes that are not connected to their mission. Okay? All right. By the way, I should say, I know I've been getting some other questions in the Q&A, and I will answer some of them at the end. Some of them are sort of not quite fitting into the theme of things right now, not that they're not good questions, so we will get there as well. All right. Here is, Okay, so here is, not surprisingly, the question about whether or not you have outcome change for your critical outcomes. So again, look at your logic models, or think about your logic models, and think about whether or not you can see the clear outcome change for those outcomes that you are deciding are critical. And I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that. So yes, we've got it for all of them. We have it for nearly all of them, or got to work on that part. Okay. All right, let's see what this looks like. All right, so the good thing is if we take the yes and the nearly all, you guys are doing really well. We've got 66.7% of you can see outcome change for your critical outcomes, so that's wonderful. For those of you who don't have those outcome changes yet, that is fine. Again, it may be something that you may want to juggle later as well, okay, or focus on later. Sorry, don't know why I said juggle. All right, so here comes a chat box. So I want you guys to think about your logic models, and I want you all to pretend that you're evaluators. Whether or not you are an evaluator, I want you to pretend that you're an evaluator for a moment, and I want you to think about whether or not your logic model does a really good job of unpacking the program and the important parts of the program for the evaluator. Or are there things, parts of it, that program staff may need to unpack better? And if you're an evaluator, there may be things that you've been like, I wonder what that is. So that would be a good indication that there's something there to unpack. All right, so answers in the group chat box, please. Again, no dissertations. Y'all are doing really well with giving me enough that I understand what's going on in your brain, but not a dissertation, so that's wonderful. So I'm going to be quiet and let you guys type in the chat box. All right, so I have one answer so far, which is great, and it's a wonderful answer, which is the evaluators may not understand how outputs connect to outcomes. That is true. I have had to have a lot of conversations with people trying to understand the connection that to them is crystal clear, and I'm sitting there as the evaluation TA or as the evaluator saying, how is that connected? And also trying to figure out outcome chains. So that's a good thing too, like helping them understand what it is. All right, so here's the space question again, right? Like, how do we put all this here? And this, again, is a place to think about, do you actually need more than one logic model? And how can you sort of use those together? All right, so program staff would tell the evaluators there's much more that happens in activities than the logic model represents. I think that's true. I think sometimes the activities is the tip of the iceberg, right? I think about some programs where one of the critical things that's driving the outcomes that you're getting is the relationship between the staff person and the person, and that's rarely represented in a logic model, okay? Now, doing your logic model with the evaluator will help make sure that they see all the connections. So that's a really good way to do this. And I do encourage all of you who have a logic model and you're going to work with an evaluator, I encourage you to sit down and talk with them about it. Get their input. Have them ask questions. Okay? All right, so somebody is challenging me and saying that, oh, no, they're saying their logic model is not helpful for evaluators. I was like, wait a minute, a logic model is helpful for evaluators. Yes, if your logic model doesn't have the logic in it, it is going to be difficult for the evaluator to use it, right? At that point, they're just seeing a box of inputs, a box of activities, a box of outputs, and they're like, okay. So it's really important to work with your evaluators, if you have evaluators, and make sure they understand what they need to understand. Because otherwise, they may end up measuring things that you're like, why did you measure that? They're like, well, it's on your logic model. Or they say, well, the literature says that this kind of program should have this kind of an outcome. But it may not be something that your program was actually developed to change. So it's important to have those conversations. Okay. All right. So I previewed this one a little bit too when I talked about continuous quality improvement. So continuous quality improvement, or CQI, is an important thing to help make sure that you're actually delivering the program that you intend to deliver. It's got a little bit of fidelity attached to it. But it also has a lot of trying to figure out what's working and what's not working attached to it. So that's the continuous quality improvement piece. So my question here is, could your logic model help your team think about a CQI process? Now, I'm not assuming that you have a CQI process. If you do, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. Just think about whether or not your logic model has stuff in it helpful if you were trying to do a CQI process. Oh, sorry. Thanks for group chatting because I forgot to put the poll up. Here's the poll. Nope, stop group chat. Poll questions on your slide. Choose yes, no, or don't think about the CQI process. Although I'll tell you that one person said their CQI process is why they drafted the logic model, which is a great comment, and I appreciate that. All right, turn back to your poll screen. Sorry, that was my fault. I'll give you a couple more seconds since I had you snookered into what you should be responding to. All right. So great. 81.3% of you say that your logic model could help your team think about your CQI process. That's wonderful. That is a great reason to have a logic model. It is a great reason to revisit a logic model because, of course, a CQI process could help you realize that something in your logic model isn't actually what's going down, so you need to change your logic model. For those of you who don't think about the CQI process, I encourage you, just like I encourage you to think about your logic models and whether or not they need to be revisited, I encourage you to think about a CQI process. It can be really helpful when you're delivering a program. All right. So there are two things that I want you all to remember. Well, there's a lot of things I want you to remember, but there are two on this slide. First of all, your logic model should be viewed as a living document. One of you put this in the group chat earlier, and I really do appreciate it. The logic model that you develop when you start a program or when you write a grant application or when you design an evaluation is what you think that program is going to be and how you think that program is going to look, right? It is the logic at that point in time. We've all been doing this for a while, I imagine, and even if you haven't been, you know that nothing ever goes according to plan, and that includes when you implement a program. Sometimes things don't go according to plan. The great weekend activities that you had planned for youth actually don't happen because you just can't, they're not available on the weekends, whatever it is, okay? So your logic model really should be a living document. You should be revisiting it, both to update it to reflect what the program actually is, and also to remind yourself of what the program was intended to be and what it was intended to do. And you should use it to help with conversations with stakeholders or partners to help remind them of what the program was intended to do. And if the community needs something different, then it's time to think about a different program and a different logic model. The other thing I want you guys to remember is that logic models really can serve multiple purposes. So as we talked about, it can help you think about CQI, it can help you think about evaluation, it can also help you think about program implementation, right? In a logic model, you need to articulate what the activities are and what the outputs are. You can look at those outputs and see whether or not you're achieving them. You can look at that list of activities and figure out whether or not it's really what's going on in that program. Okay? And the other thing I want you to remember is that you may need more than one logic model. And if so, you need to think about why do you need those other logic models. So just to be clear, I am not advocating for you all to go out and to create a set of 10 logic models to represent one program. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is think about who you might need a logic model for and what that logic model needs to show them, and build the logic models that you need in order to be able to use them in the ways in which you want. Now, the other things that are not on the slide, of course, that I'm going to remind you of that I think you should remember are the love of the if-then statement. Okay, remember, go back to intro. I taught intro to bio in 9th grade, and that was when we did if-then and experiment, right? So go back there, love your if-then statements, and the other one is the outcome chain. Remember to love your outcome chains and make sure they're there too. And of course, your immediate outcomes should be connected to your output so you can get everything there. All right. I'm going to share a couple of resources. Oops, sorry, I just had something pop up I was not expecting. I'm going to share a couple of resources with you. They are hyperlinked in the slide deck so you can get there yourself. These are some publicly available resources about logic models. They're actually my favorites. So the Kellogg Foundation in 2004 wrote a logic model development guide, which is really thoughtful and helpful. And then there's some other programs out there as well, including the last one, the Logic Model Builders, was built for child welfare, but it'll actually build your logic model for you. You have to think about what goes in it, but they'll do the structuring. So it's kind of a neat tool to use as well. All right. So let's talk about what is next for you all. So first of all, I really do encourage you to meet as a team to review your logic models and consider what kind of changes. Do you need to use the if-then lens and kind of tighten things up a little bit? Do you need to look at the outcome chain and fix things in there a little bit? Do you need more logic models? Okay. The SRAE National Evaluation Team is here to provide additional support for you. So if you need individual support, please email the SRAE TA@mathematica-mpr.com email. And as I said at the very beginning, there will be some office hours that will be announced to you all via email to discuss logic models with the SRAE team and other grantees. As Heather said at the beginning, this is the second webinar in a series, and the next one is on June 30th, and that one will be on continuous quality improvement, or CQI. So that should be a really interesting webinar for you all. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to answer some of the questions that came in. If you have other questions that you haven't put in yet, please put them in. But while I am sharing with you all questions, I will go back here and give you the contact information, which gives you the email address, so you guys can send questions, comments, or concerns about logic models to the SRAE mailbox. All right. So one of the questions we had was about whether or not you should consider internal and external factors in the logic model. And my answer is yes. The contextual factors that we saw back in that simple presentation of a logic model is an important piece of kind of what is going on with your logic model. And some of that's kind of hidden in some of your assumptions as well. But the short answer is yes. I think you need to think about both internal and external factors and how they can interact with your program. Okay, somebody is asking about whether or not it's normal to see program evaluation in the column of a program output. I think in some ways this may depend on who exactly you're developing your logic model for. I would say that program evaluation is not an output of a program. I feel like a program evaluation is something that is done hopefully jointly to some extent with the program. And so it's not really an output of the program. It is something that the program is going through. So I would not expect to see program evaluation in the column as an output. But again, you should think about sort of who is the audience and who are you developing your logic model for, because there may be somebody who expects to see that there. All right. I'm just looking through to see if we have any other questions. Okay. Anything that they'd like to share, feel free to put it either in the group chat box or you can put it in the question box. All right. All right, I don't see any other questions. Heather or Jessica, do you want to say anything before Brian closes? Oh, Heather Zavari, there's a question for you about what time is the June 30th webinar?
Yes, thank you, Kay, and thank you everybody for joining today's webinar. It's been a really great discussion on logic models, and I think our next webinar on June 30th, focused on continuous quality improvement, is really meant to be an extension of this discussion on logic models, where CQI has come up multiple times, and we'll be using the next webinar as well as a couple after that to focus in on aspects of the CQI process. The time for the webinar will be at this same time as today's webinar. We really are trying to aim these at the 3 to 4:30 block so that we can really try to accommodate as many time zones as possible. And we expect to send the invitation for that webinar out within the next week or 10 days.
So Heather, there's a question about whether or not there are logic model examples specific to the SRAE program that are available to the grantees. That's a question more for you than for me.
Yeah. Right now, the SRAE team does not have logic model examples available, but if that is something that's helpful, we can definitely work to pull some of those together as a resource for you all.
All right, we'll hang out for another second or two and see if anything else comes in. I do want to say thank you all for the kind comments in the group chat. I'm glad that you enjoyed the interactive nature of this webinar, and I'm glad you found it useful. It's always nice to know that your webinar does not fall on deaf ears, so that's great to know that you've enjoyed this so far. All right. Brian, I think we might be ready to close out if Heather agrees with me.
I do. Thank you, Kay.
All right.
Okay. That will conclude today's webinar. At the end of this webinar, there will be a survey that pops up on your screen. Please take time to fill that out. Have a great afternoon.